Hello, everyone. Today is Thursday, March 3rd, 2022. 440 civilians killed in South Sudan clashes. UN. This article is taken from AFP, a French newspaper. At least 440 civilians died in brutal fighting between rival factions in southwestern South Sudan over just a few months last year, the United Nations said on Tuesday. The report comes on the heels of a warning by the United Nations last month that the world's youngest country risked a return to war with bouts of inter-ethnic violence and political infighting threatening to undo even the limited progress made in implementing a stuttering peace process. Grave human rights violations and abuses, including hundreds of killings, were committed against civilians during fighting in Tambura County, western Equatorial State, according to the joint report issued Tuesday by the United Nations Mission in South Sudan, UNMISS, and the UN Human Rights Office. It blamed members of the armed forces loyal to President Salva Kiir and rivals in the Sudan People's Liberation Movement Army in opposition, SPLM/A-IO, of Vice President Riek Machar and their respective affiliated militias for the violence. And then you have President Kiir complaining to the UN about the arms embargo and how he can't supply his large army with weapons because of the UN arms embargo. How in the hell do you expect them to supply you with weapons when you have a civil war between different ethnic groups? They don't. The excuse that they're gonna give is that you'll just commit genocide. Between June and September last year, at least 440 civilians were killed in fighting between rival groups in Tambura County. 18 injured and 74 abducted, the report found. At least 64 civilians were also subjected to conflict-related sexual violence. Among them, a 13-year-old girl who was gang raped to death, it said, while at least 56 people were reported missing during the June to September period. These African men who do this, I do not identify with at all. I don't know what planet they come from. I mean, I am ashamed of them. In addition, some 80,000 were forced to flee their homes to escape the fighting, it said. Looting and destruction of property, child conscription, attacks on personnel and facilities, hate speech and incitement to violence were among the other human rights violations the investigation uncovered. The report said a large number of victims and witnesses interviewed depicted men armed with AK-47 rifles as well as machine guns and other weapons including machetes, knives, and clubs. The attackers often moved in small groups dressed in black, concealed their faces, and spoke a combination of languages, Azande, Balanda, and Arabic, it said. The Tambura region, which lies not far from the border with the Central African Republic, has long been the scene of rivalry between the Azande and Balanda ethnic groups. The UN report said those suspected of instigating and aiding the latest Tambura violence included high-ranking military officials and community and religious leaders. I don't consider them leaders, people who do this. These people in charge, maybe, religious people in charge, but not leaders. We call on all parties to the conflict to hold to account all individuals implicated in the killings, rape, and abductions Among other grave human rights violations, UN High Commissioner for Human Rights Michelle Bachelet said in a statement. So we have foreigners who have to come on the African continent to tell us how we need to get our act together. Get your act together, South Sudan. The perpetrators of such brutal violence against the men, women, and children of South Sudan cannot be left to benefit from impunity, she added. The country has suffered from chronic instability since independence in 2011, and they still can't get their act together. Over 10 years later, including a brutal 5-year civil war between forces loyal to Kiir and Machar that cost almost 400,000 lives. Why? Because you're from two different ethnic groups? 2 years ago, the two men formed a unity government, cementing a peace deal signed in 2018 that brought an end to the conflict. But since then, South Sudan has lurched from crisis to crisis, battling flooding, hunger, as well as violence and political bickering as the promises held out by the peace agreement failed to materialize. Key provisions are yet to be implemented, with less than a year left before elections are due to be held. After the elections, what the hell is going to happen? You're not going to have peace, so why even have elections? You can't even take care of your own business, South Sudan. The failure to form a unified armed forces command, hence the UN arms embargo, a key component of the peace deal, has created an environment in which violence remains rife, the UN says. There is a real risk of going back to conflict, Yasmin Suka, head of the UN Commission on Human Rights in South Sudan, told journalists during a visit to the country last month. The reason why Africa is in the situation that it is after going through slavery at the hands of the Arabs and the Europeans, and then subsequently colonization, is because Africans were not united. They were fighting each other. Okay? If Africans would have been united and looked at themselves as all one, from the Sahel to southern Africa, we would have been invincible. They wouldn't have been able to take us. We have about 1 billion people on the African continent. How is it with all those people, they were able to come in and enslave us and colonize us with just thousands of people? So likewise, if we don't get our act together, South Sudan, they're going to come back and take over for good.